Okay, so my name is Sarah Newton. I am a teacher. I've spent 10 years in Fort St. James and 18 years in a classroom in Revelstoke. And I just retired and I've been TTOCing and delivering workshops for the BC Teacher Federation on climate change and anti-racism. So I'm on the territory of the Wet'suwet'en in the Gittinan clan, and I'm really honored to be here and to have witnessed some of the activism going on with the First Nation here and trying to get to know the nation a bit better and to be able to collaborate with environmental issues up here. Perfect. So, you guys, if you're working with an environmental group or your environmental science class, a lot of the time kids are really angry with good reason about why we're in the state we're in and why they see so little action from adults. And I feel for them. So one thing, I'm going to just pretend this is you're helping kids talk to parents, but a lot of the time they think their parents don't care, but kids do have a way of pressuring their parents and getting things done, and youth can increase their parents' level of concern about climate change because unlike adults, children and youth, their view on the world hasn't been entrenched in political ideology. They're still seeing things without a lot of complication, and parents do care what their kids think, even on socially charged issues like climate change. And this goes for your staff as well. So if you're trying to bring up an issue around the climate that you want change with, a lot of the time it's good to write it down and just be clear with what you want to communicate, whether you're in the staff room or talk if the kids are talking to their parents. It helps for kids too to know that they can write it down. It's intimidating to talk. And even for me, talking to someone like my principal or a colleague about something I want to change for a more climate friendly or sustainable option, sometimes it's best to write it down and really take your time to make it clear. But in chat in person's good. You just have to choose your time when you're going to do it. And so when we're talking, we're trying to be clear and when possible, have the discussions when we're calm and we've thought things out and when we can articulate clearly. And for kids, they need to learn that emotions are good, but at the same time, being calm makes a kid more believable or more taken more seriously. And a lot of the time when I'm teaching, I'm teaching my kids to use the I and we statements, like, I want to feel that we're part of a solution and not adding to a problem. And I know we're doing a lot around here at our house or in our school, and I think there's more we can do. So teaching kids the I and we and the you always is a really tough one for kids to get away from, but we like to say, you always do this and we need to do that instead. So teaching them that as soon as they say that, it shuts people down and puts them on the defensive. So we're teaching kids. The example I'm using through this whole thing is if a child, a teenager is trying to talk their parents out of buying another big SUV. This is the example I came up with because I had a student come to me really upset in my little climate group because her dad and mom had decided to buy a Tacoma truck. And so that was the example. So they can be calmly saying, I feel it's unfair that we're buying another SUV. And they can use I statements like, I know we do a lot of traveling and sometimes the roads are rough. I understand that. And I see where you're coming from. So they talk about their concerns, and it helps that whoever's in opposition tries to figure out why someone's buying this truck or why someone's behaving in this way, and to really be curious and not judging. And that's really, really hard for all of us to just to truly listen to someone's reasons and make it as clear as possible that you want to listen and listen without interruption, and then thank them and say, you know what, they've given me a lot to think about. And then walk away from that conversation because now you're armed with the points that you can go up against. For example, if it was the vehicle, you could say, okay, well, do we really need a new vehicle? And if you can agree with your parents that yes, you do, then you can start researching the things that they're looking at. Like you might want them to buy an electric vehicle. So you can find out what their issues are with that and then defend yourself if that's what you really want. But seeing their perspective is really important. And also it's good to talk about the good things. Don't always be going to your principal or your parent only when there's a problem. Like really try and have conversations that are complementary or pointing out things you've worked on together so that people are comfortable talking with you. So they're learning now that you like to listen and that you're not always just the troublemaker. So relationships are built on more than just these difficult conversations. So really try and build relationships. And then you're looking for ways to compromise because we think sometimes our bosses or our parents are unreasonable, but usually people are willing to find a happy medium if they feel they're being listened to. And the other thing I tell students in my green team is they need to also kind of do their part and show that they're serious about it. Like, and this is the same for colleagues. You need to be perceived as mature and serious about the topic. So if it was a student with the vehicles, you could be modeling that you're driving your bike, riding your bike more, or taking public transit or carpooling. And I tell the students that parents notice these things. They don't have to really be pointed out. They just need to start modeling the behavior of doing more. And then the next part is the kids can follow up with a conversation after they've kind of figured out why their parents are doing this behavior they think is bad for the environment. You can check in and then discuss it because you've researched your points. And another thing that's really good in any kind of situation at this point is try and steer away from saying, yeah, but. So if they're saying, we're not getting an electric car because blah, 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 the response is always, yeah, but. So instead, I'm teaching my students to say yes, and. So this takes really practice for all of us to rethink our conversations, and myself especially. But that minute you put but in the conversation, you're negating anything you're saying because people just, they get up. So these are all really good conversation pieces. And that I have a geography degree at university and I do a lot of climate activism, but then I took 3 courses from Cornell University on climate education, climate science, nature education. And my course on climate education wasn't on climate education. It was on the psychology of persuasion. And it was incredible. The psychology of persuasion is what's used on the public every day for us to buy things, but it's all scientifically based and kind of used against us to be bigger consumers. But the psychology is really interesting, like how to change behavior. So I teach this to my students because kids change their parents' minds all the time. They force them into buying things at the grocery store and taking them out to dinner and taking them to the mall. So I try and teach and use myself the principles of influence. And the first one is reciprocity. And so that's people are obliged to give back to others a behavior or a gift they've received first. So if a friend invites you to their party, you always have this obligation to invite them back. And you can use that in a social, environmental context too. Like if you're going to be trying to reduce waste in your classroom, you can be helping out by making muffins for people and showing them, oh, these aren't in wrappers. I just brought them all in. And you're modeling that, but also you're making the students think, oh, I need to do something environmentally friendly like that too. Or, you bring a big thing of yogurt in and you scoop it out into little cups instead of buying the individual yogurts. So you can use reciprocity to get people to change their behavior. And the second universal principle of influence is scarcity. And we all know this. If you put red construction paper out, a big pile of it, and then just a few green sheets of construction paper, the kids all go for the green because there's less of them. So you can be using this effectively by pointing out like, oh, mom and dad, did you know those Hyundai Kona full electric cars are so highly rated and so popular that they're really hard to get and there's a waiting list. So maybe we should just get on the waiting list. So the idea of scarcity by saying there aren't very many works for people. Another principle of influence is authority. And I just told you that I have a geography degree and that I have courses from Cornell. and that I'm on the board of Wild Site, an environmental educators group, and I work for the BC Teacher Federation. That gives me authority, and I find a lot of time educators are really humble and they don't do that. But it really helps people want to believe you because they're like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. And so don't be afraid to have that diploma on the wall or to tell people in a nice way that you do have some research and authority and experience on this. And kids can do that too. They can say, I've been reading, and then they can cite the source. I have been learning in my science class. So kids can use authority to influence people. It's not just something they made up or saw on a TikTok. The fourth principle is consistency of influencing people. People like to be consistent. So if you're doing small things like, what's an example I have here? If you point out, hey, mom and dad, we're recycling, we try and buy in bulk, we have this great garden at home, we're buying from the farmer's market, you get people to see, oh, this new behavior I'm trying to get my parents to do. If the parents can see that it's consistent with what they've been doing in the past, if that's pointed out to them, it's very helpful. And we can do this with principals too. And superintendents, like, look at all this stuff we've been doing. This is just adding to that. And the fifth principle is liking. So if a child or a teen can point out what their parent's friend is doing, that's a behavior they want their parents to do, or a celebrity that they know their parents like, people like to be seen that they're doing something that others are doing, especially others that they look up to. And the last principle of influence is social proof. And that's especially when people are uncertain, they will look to actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. So this is like if you say, you're in the hotel and it says, please, or if you're in, say, the grocery store and it says, please bring your own bags. It's even more authoritative if you can say 740 people last week brought their own bags. You can too. Like that idea that the majority is doing something, people, they do respond to that. And I follow a lawyer in the States, and he talks a lot about persuasion, and he's very, very good. What this guy says, his name is Jefferson Fisher. He's a prosecuting attorney in the States, and he talks about the way we talk to people. We really need to genuinely listen, and we really genuinely need to not, it's that golden rule of treat others how we want to be treated. No one likes it when we're barked at and told something, and we need to remember that when it's most difficult. So he just had a really nice way of doing that. So I was going to show you him. But what he says is the harder you push for something with someone, the harder you jam it down their throat, the more you make them defend themselves and their point of view, and the more hardened they become. And we see that in the polarization around us today, right? People are just barking at each other and not really listening. And the behavior you're trying to change becomes even more entrenched in part of their belief system. It's called this backfire effect, and it's a cognitive bias. So even in the face of opposite facts, if people are really dug into their opinion, they will stick there if they feel threatened. So as change makers, like we are, we need to come from a genuine place of curiosity, even when it's just an opinion we think is ridiculous, and find out why they believe what they believe. A few other things I tell my students is that we've gotten to this place on the planet. I consider it death by a thousand cuts. Thousands of things have gone wrong to put us in this state of hyper-consumerism and climate collapse. So to get out of it, it's going to have to be survival by a thousand solutions. So when people were coming up against have other solutions, like let's say they think the solution to the problem is colonizing Mars, for example. No, let's do another one. Let's do nuclear. It's so easy to go, oh no, that won't work. But what's really important is if we can go, yeah, I can see why you would think that, and it might work in some places. It's a very complex issue, energy, and there's different solutions for different places. So people like to argue like, about small things, when in fact it's going to take a lot of different solutions depending where we are. And the issues are complex. So if you can teach students to say that in an argument, like, yes, I can see how you could feel that way, and it's a really complicated problem. Let's look at, different options just to help people understand that there's lots of problems and lots of different solutions. There's no silver bullet. I also point out that we're in a rare spot on Earth, actually, right now in Canada and Western Canada. The impacts of climate change are coming here. We're seeing them, but it's not like we live in Bangladesh where we're basically underwater and our government is collapsing and has no power in a global theater anyway. We do have the ability to protest and elicit change, and we are also big players in the problem. Canadian resource extraction companies and Canadian policy. So changes we do ask for and can make happen are big. And that's a very empowering thing for kids who have a lot of despair to say, actually, where we live, things that we do really do matter. And also, I think it's important that students know that turning off the lights and putting on a sweater is not going to solve the problem. It's important that they model the change they want to see, but activism, like it's really changing government policy and also thinking about consumer habits, because big business wants to pit us against each other, the 99%. So it's really important that kids see that exact idea that they shouldn't be made to feel guilty or shamed because they have been brought up in a system of hyper consumerism. Um, so activism is really important. Writing politicians, calling on politicians, using their voting, their spending power as a way, like every dollar you spend is a vote for what you believe in, that kind of thing is really important, and not to get bogged down on the small things. And I think in our roles, it's important for the kids to have a bit of optimism. And I often say, yeah, you may think it's really dire. Things are going to change. And it's about how hard the fall is going to be before we make those changes and what kind of control we want over how things are going to pan out, that we have. And that's the optimism, is that change is going to happen. Let's see what we can do to make it happen in a way that's equitable and the least painful. For a sign off, I want to thank the participants, because I give my notes, but then I take notes from what people have said, and then I learn something too. So, and I just wanted to thank the Edith Landau Center for making this possible. It makes my day and gives me a little bit of spark to talk to people. So thank you. Thanks.